So yesterday we read Parshas Para, as the Mishnah says in Megillah Daf Chavtas Amud Aleph, that we have the four Parshas that we read before Pesach.
That's my bar mitzvah.
Mark's Bar Mitzvah Parsha is so the third of the fourth is Parshas Para. The passage in the Torah that talks about Para Aduma, and as Rashi says over there, the reason we read this in preparation for Pesach is because Lahazhir Es Yisrael Latahir, to remind or to warn the Jewish people to purify themselves, Sheyasu Pischem Betara, to be able to do their Passover sacrifices, Karbonos Betara. Now, even though the Jews were Oila L'Regel, they came to the Beis HaMikdash, and all of the three Regalim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, and you can't go into the Beis HaMikdash at any time when in a state of impurity, of Tumah, but nevertheless, out of all the three, the primary time when it was important for everybody to become Tahir was for Pesach, because that was the time to eat to bring the Karban Pesach. Now, there are numerous types of Tumah and Tahara, of impurity. Most of the types of Tumah which come from coming in contact with dead animals or bodily emissions or the like can be dealt with by going to mikveh. Yeah, sometimes there has to be preparation to go to the mikveh. There has to be a mayon for a zav, but it's all you can deal with it in your own backyard type of thing. The exception is tumas meis. If a person becomes tamei from coming in contact with a dead body, and we'll see in a moment what type of contact we're talking about over here, so then the only way to become tahir was through the para aduma. Now, once upon a time, having to undergo this process of being sprinkled with the waters and ashes of the para aduma was ma'asim b'chol yom. This was totally the norm. All Jews were familiar with it. It was it was something that was just part of everyday Jewish life. You know, just like nowadays, certain things, when you live a Torah life long enough, certain things just become second nature. You know, you don't put your hot water in on Shabbos and you kosher, whatever. Certain things you just you check your pockets before you go out on Shabbos if you live in a place without an Eruv. So the Tumah and Tahara and even the sprinkling of the Para Aduma used to be this way. And the reason is for a number of things. First of all, of course, for going into the Beis HaMikdash, that was the most important time when it was relevant. But even for your average Joe who didn't necessarily, especially if you lived far from Jerusalem, didn't necessarily go into the Beis HaMikdash on a very regular basis, there were other reasons to maintain purity. First of all, more so for Kohanim, but even for all Jews, in terms of separating truma from your produce and challah from your dough and your bread. All of these things, while they can be done, and there is ways to deal with them if they're done with truma, with impurity, but the ideal way to do it is always with in a status of purity, and it was relevant to everybody. In addition, maintaining a status of tahara, of purity, was considered a value, an intrinsic value, not just because if you're impure you can't go into the Beis HaMikdash or you're limited in this, that, or the other, but intrinsically maintaining a status of tahara was tahara. That's what it means. It means purity, holiness, spirituality. And while I'm sure I could quote for you numerous sources, certainly in Chassidish Sfarim and even in Chazal, which extol the virtue of maintaining a status of purity, I find it extra powerful to read to you from the Rambam, who the Rambam is the halachist, right? And this is what the Rambam says at the very end of the laws of Tumas Eichlin. I think it's chapter 16 is the last chapter of Tumas Eichlin, and it's the last halacha, number 12. I put it here in my shita. I put it here with Hebrew and English, but I'm not very impressed with this translation, so I'll try and do it myself. Even though it's perfectly permissible for your layman to eat and drink foods that are impure, Chasidim harishonim, the pious people of days of yore, of early generations, would eat even their chulin, even their regular mundane food, not the sacrificial or the truma or all that. Even the mundane food, they would only eat it b'tahara, with a state of purity. And they would be careful all their lives to, as much as possible, retain a status of tahara. The Heinan Nikroim Perushim, we refer to these Jews as the Perushim, which is the Perushim as opposed to the Tzedekим, like what in today's language we might call the Orthodox Jews, right? The Orthodox. V'davar zeh kedusha yiserahi. This is an extra measure of holiness. V'derech hasidus. It is the way or the path of piety. Sheyyanivdal adam u'perish mishara, that a person maintains his tznius, his individuality. He's separated from other people. You don't go around touching people. You don't just dine with anybody. Because this type of behavior leads one to the purity abstaining from bad deeds, right? So purity brings you to behave properly. This type of behavior also brings one to a holy nefesh, holy soul. To be free from evil, or from evil's the wrong word, from bad deis. From bad deis in the Rambam's language means characteristics or attributes, right? Like midos, what we would call midos. And this causes one to be likened to Hashem. The Rambam brings the pasuk. So we see that there is this intrinsic value which in maintaining a status of Tara, something which nowadays we cannot do. We do not have the ashes of the Parah Aduma anymore. In the words of the Rambam, which we'll talk about, the Mehira Yigala Mashiach will make the next Parah Aduma. But once upon a time, this was the way it was done. Now, I should mention parenthetically that there seems to be discovered the exact location on Har HaMishcha, which we call the Har HaZeis, the Mount of Olives, where they used to burn the Parah Aduma, because the Mishnah says that it was on a rock, and the rock was on a hollow boir. It seems like they know where this place is, and this is one of a number of months ago we spoke about the different opinions of the location of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that it seems to be, from my limited understanding, it seems to be quite unanimous amongst contemporary studies and archaeologists, etc., that we know for sure the Kodesh HaKadoshim was in the place what we call today the Dome of the Rock. And one of the bases for that is because they used to burn the Parah Aduma exactly opposite the Heichal, and they think that they found that place, and it matches up exactly with that. So that's another, just finally. All right. Now, how do we obtain a Parah Aduma? So, we know that it's permissible to rely on non-Jews to buy the Parah Aduma from them. That means like this. Parah Aduma has to be, the Rambam says, Bas Shalish Shanim Bas Arba, which means in our language 2 or 3 years old, in the 3rd or 4th year. And you're not supposed to purchase it before it's that age. So you purchase it at that age. Now, we said before there has to be a heifer. That means it's never had been mated, and also never had any yoke or anything placed on it other than for its own needs. Like if it's cold, you could put a blanket on it, but nothing, you can't put anything on it. So how do you trust that the guy has maintained it in that method? So there's a machlokes in the Mishnah, but Lamaisa, we pass that you can buy it from a guy, and so why are we not concerned that the guy has done something wrong with it? So the psikta, I guess it's the medrash, that's Tanaic, Brises, tell a story of how Chazal wanted to buy a Parah Aduma from a certain guy, and he was playing with them with the money, with the price, and then they came back the next day, and they were able to tell that between the last visit and this visit, he had put a yoke on it. because one of the stories is say that there was a hair on the neck, which they could tell yesterday was upright, and this way it was flat. Another place in the Medrash says that they were able to tell in the eyes that it had something in the eyes of the cow. Were able to tell if it had ever had a yoke on it. It seems that this would be a miraculous occurrence. That's what the Tiferes Yisrael says in his Pirush on the Mishnah, that it was a miraculous thing that they were able to tell. Be that as it may, we see that with Maisa we paskin that you can buy it from a goy. Now today, we're going to talk about this more soon, but nowadays, there are paros adumos being raised, both in Israel and in the north. They have a place where they have, but I think primarily it's here in America, where you have none other than the religious Christians who are who are raising the paros adumas. So we have to be able to trust them. And nowadays, there's all sorts of things that you have to be careful about that you would usually do with cattle that you're not allowed to do with a paros aduma. Besides mating or putting a yoke, any of that stuff. You have to, for example, make sure you don't pierce the ear, because that would make the cow a balmum. So now, most times cattle have like a little tag which they pierce through the ear, which doesn't disqualify it from eating. It doesn't make it not kosher, but it would disqualify it from being used as a carbon, including the carbon such as the paros aduma. Now,
wait, you can't use it for mating too?
Correct.
So how do you perpetuate it? How do you?
Well. So once upon a time, I don't know that they were able to perpetuate it in the way that they can today. Nowadays, you have sort of genetic ways to, non-GMO paradumas. There are ways to mess around with it, but I would imagine that once the paraduma, this means like this: a paraduma doesn't last forever. Besides its age, it also, the older it gets, the more non-red hairs it gets. Now, there's a little bit of misnomer. People say, if it has 2 black hairs, it's no longer kosher. That's not 100% accurate. If it has 2 black hairs next to each other, that's when it's not kosher for paraduma. If it has 1 hair on one spot of the cow and another black hair elsewhere in the cow, it's still kosher. But as the cow gets older, it does get more black or white hairs, as we do, and
just white.
it's
And
a wise cow.
And once it's at that stage, it's no longer kosher itself for paraduma. But there may be, again, I'm no expert on genetics of any genetics, certainly not of animals, but perhaps there's some sort of way of perpetuating it in that way. Now,
in what way?
Meaning once it itself is not kosher because it has too many black hairs, so then you can mate it.
One you use for
I that's just my guess.
What about the branding? They always brand these cows.
Oh, no,
I don't want to brand.
You can't do that.
Yeah, but
All right.
do.
No, it's like a name tag nowadays.
But that one will be good for mating.
Can't do that either.
That was
That
back
one
with
was-
Yellowstone.
I haven't seen Brandon.
Okay. Lamaisa, so there's other things they do. For example, the animal's not allowed to be a treifa. Now, you wouldn't know because it's not like shechting for eating. The paraduma, you wouldn't check for a treifa. You would burn it. You would shecht it and then just burn it as it is. But you want to do as much as you can to make sure it doesn't become treifa, so you're very careful about how you feed it. And they also, if I understand correctly, the ones in Israel, they actually feed them these magnets that any metal that this cow would eat should go to the magnet and not pierce the stomach or the lungs or anything. It's interesting, I listened to a class from Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu. Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu is a Rabbi, I believe he's in Tzfas. He's the son of Mordechai Eliyahu. And he said that he once visited a shlachtos, and he was standing next to the guy who was checking the lungs of all the cows, and the farmer who had raised these cows was standing right there as well. And basically, when they're checking the cows, there's 3 categories: there's kosher, there's glat, and there's bet yosef, right? So he said the farmer, before the guy checked the cows, he was predicting this guy's going to be kosher, he's going to be not kosher, he's going to be bet yosef. And he says, because I know I raised them. This cow had the flu. This guy had, and based on the medical history of the cows, he was able to predict exactly what the state of each one's lungs are going to be. Anyway, I found that interesting. Anyway, back to Tumah. So, to become tamei from a dead body is very easy, right? First, in other words, it's all of us, every single person in this room is tamei mess.
Even me?
Even you. The only actually, I should rephrase that. There is one exception in this room. yours truly. Mitzvah Hashem, very soon you will be tummy mess. So,
Oh, just like
Like I am.
you'll be impure.
but you are. The truth is, if I recall,
Have a head start.
if I recall correctly, midrabanan non-Jews are also tummy mess, but we're not going to get into that right now. It could actually make a difference because the Rambam says. See, what part of the issue with those who want to renew the paraduma nowadays before Mashiach comes is how do you get a Kohen to do the procedure who he himself is tahor, right? So the Rambam actually doesn't say this in Hilchos Paraduma, but elsewhere in the Rambam, I don't remember exactly where, there is an implication which the commentaries point out that just for the shechting of the Paraduma, you don't have to be a Kohen. Everything else has to be done by a Kohen. The actual shechting cannot be. So in theory, you could have a guy convert and then right away go and shech the Paraduma, and he would not be Chayra. Anyway. Whatever. I go on. So how does a person become tummy mess? So first of all, of course, if a person touches a dead body, then he is tummy mess. Now, most people probably have never touched a corpse of a Jewish person, so that's not so relevant to us. However, you may have, if you come under the same shelter, under the same roof as a dead body, so then you're tummy mess. So first of all, in a hospital. If you've ever been into a hospital, most likely, most of the time, there is, in most hospitals, a morgue, and that makes you tummy mess. It's actually a whole shaila. How could a kohen go with his wife to give birth if he's going, okay, whatever, that's not for now, right? Similarly,
How could a Kohen be a doctor?
a kohen cannot be a doctor according to halacha. I'm pretty sure that's unequivocally agreed on.
I think it's unequivocally agreed on to become a doctor, but once they're a doctor, they could still because now they're needed and whatever.
Yeah, if a Kohen, maybe before he became observant, was
Right,
yeah,
right.
fine.
I think
Right.
that,
Become a doctor and then become a Kohen? Is that?
No.
That's what it sounded like.
I'm in the wrong business for that.
but there might be ways that preclude that if somehow they avoid contact with dead bodies. I don't know, but
They have
then
to
Why not
do
like
that.
Dr. Kleinman?
what?
They have to
He's
do
excited.
that.
Yeah, but maybe there's some medical.
Let's not comment about specific individuals. All right. Okay. Besides going into a hospital, you also have other. For example, if you drive next to a cemetery and there's a Jewish cemetery, and there's a tree hanging over the cemetery and also hanging over a grave and also hanging over the car, and you drive under it, or walk under it, right? So that again is a way to make you impure. Now, once upon a time, they were very aware of this, and people, just like now, we're aware of kosher, and you don't just eat anything; you check that it has a hechsher, right? So, once upon a time, it was second nature to them. And this, for example, you've come across maybe in the laws of bikurim when you would bring the first fruits to the Beis Hamikdash. So it says, if they would stop overnight, they wouldn't just go into your Holiday Inn. They would sleep. They would sleep outdoors. They would go camping. Why? Because anytime you go into a building, you run the risk of being under the same shelter, under the same roof as a dead body. You don't know if there's a dead body in the building. You don't know if there maybe have been somebody buried there once upon a time. Don't forget. Once upon a time, unfortunately, children dying was much more common, and there may have been children buried in the home premises or whatever it is. There were even graves on the side of the street. It was common because traveling was dangerous. People died from all sorts of reasons, malnutrition or whatever it was. People died in traveling, and they were buried on the side of the street. So that's why the Mishnah says that before Pesach, at this time of the year, they would go out and they would mark the graves. Why would they mark the graves? Because all the people coming to the pilgrimage to Pesach had to know where the graves were to avoid them on the way to the Beis Hamikdash, and over the winter, whatever markings were there may have been washed away. So after the winter, every year they would go out again and make sure that right nowadays we have cemeteries, and it's safe to assume that there's no one buried on Howard Street. But once upon a time, it wasn't like that. So you had to avoid.
A lot of people
Right out
buried
in
in
the
bars.
street.
The gangs?
Now,
The CRC, by the way, I don't know if you've seen it before, the CRC has a list.
yes, if you go to the CRC's website, it will tell you the streets in Chicago that have to be avoided by Kohanim. I remember in
Because
London.
of the killing of the gangs or something?
No, because of cemeteries.
Oh,
Yeah, like I was surprised, like Pratt, they list,
they're like lopping off heads all over the place.
I remember in
Worse than we thought, everybody.
I remember in London, there's a street, I think it's called Hoop Lane or something, where it's you're driving past the cemetery and there's the trees. And like for me, it was relevant a couple times. If you were in the car with the Kohen, can you take the other route? Okay, but I remember in
Why did they
Yeshiva
just
there was
trim
the
the
bus. The bus used to try and get City Hall to do anything.
Pratt is a bad street.
Once upon a time, no, the trees are listed, it's a whole thing. But we're taking the bus down that street. I remember there was the Kohen Bacher in Yeshiva, who the bus would go down that street, and he relied on, I'm not familiar with all the halachas, but he relied on the heter of that you could drive by if you had all the windows closed. Because if
Like an oil?
basically if there's no peseach tefach, if there's no hole the size of a tefach, then it can't come in. The question is if through the engine how you count the holes over there. But basically this guy went in the van. This guy before they drove down Hoop Lane, this bacher, he went up and down the bus and asked everybody to please close the windows for a minute. So anyway, that was his way of getting from A to B. Now here's another really important thing. There's a halacha called halal cherev. Now let me read it to you the way the Rambam writes it. This is in Hilchos Tumas Meis, Perek Hey, halachas Gimel and Dalet. Kelim shenitmu b'meis. Utensils. Kelim means clothing, any item that's a sort of a useful utility item. Shenitmu b'meis, that have become disqualified through a dead body. Bein b'maga, bein ba'oil, whether it touched a dead body or was under the same roof as a dead body, right? So then harein l'negeh b'hen k'negeh b'meis atzmei. Somebody who touches that item is as if he is touching the dead body itself. Right? Now the Rambam continues over there. Basically, if you to take this to its logical conclusion, that would mean that even somebody who has never gone to a hospital and never remained thing, but I've gone there. Ari Marinelli has been under the same roof as a dead body. I've been under the same roof as a dead body. If that guy touches my jacket or my glasses, all right, I'm holding my kid, and he touches my yarmulke, then now the kid is tummy mess. If he touches a utensil,
I touch that.
if he touches a utensil that was under the same roof as a dead body, right?
It's primary,
What?
or is it secondary?
It's 7 days. It's Tumas Shiva. You need the par aduma.
What is the object?
No.
Or
No, the person who touches the object that was under the same roof as a dead body. Now, the Rambam doesn't say this the following clearly. This is a big issue because if you want to maintain, in order to get the people who are very busy with this are the people who are on the mission to get the par aduma done now, not to wait for Mashiach. And in order to do that, you have to have people who are pure, so you could raise people in a tumah-free environment, right, in some sort of bubble. But if it has to be such a strong bubble that they're never going to touch a utensil that was under the same, but that's a whole new level. So it seems the Ravid says, it's the Ravid elsewhere in the Kesef Mishnah. It's in Hilchos Naziros Perek Zayin Halacha Ches. Over there, the Kesef Mishnah maintains that the Rambam himself would agree to this Ravid. That actually you're taking it too far. That law only applies if the person touches the utensil while that utensil is in contact with the body. So, for example, if you have a jacket that's is sticking through the window of a hospital, and then somebody touches the other end of that jacket, then that would make him Tummy Shiva. But just because once upon a time my jacket was in the hospital, that would not make it Tummy Shiva. So if we accept that, that's certainly the Shitta of the Ravid, and the Kesef Mishnah seems to say that that's the Shitta of the Rambam as well. So if we accept that, then our bubble to raise tumah-free environment is doable. By the way, there is somewhat of an nafkamina. I don't know if this is a nafkamina lamaisa, if this is a practical ramification, but there's a nafkamina nonetheless. Everybody knows, we've discussed, a kohen is not allowed to come in contact with a dead body. What about if a kohen is already tummy, he's already impure, he's already come in contact with a dead body, right? As pretty much every kohen nowadays has, certainly if their mother had a hospital birth, no, just kidding. Yeah, certainly if the mother had a hospital birth, so he was born in a hospital, he was under, that's it, from day one, he's Tamei Mes, right? So, the Ravid holds that there is no longer a biblical prohibition for a kohen to become Tamei Mes if he is already Tamei Mes. I don't know that we pass like this Ravid, but it's certainly forbidden on a rabbinic level, but be that as it may, an interesting Ravid to
It doesn't
mention.
get worse, right?
What?
I mean, if you're already tummy nurse,
Right, certainly does
No,
get
it's
more
still
tummy. He's still tummy. The question is he prescribed? Does the Torah forbid him to go to a funeral if he's already things? So the Rabbi holds that it's only midrabanan. Okay, let's move on. What is the mitzvah of parah aduma? Very briefly, you take a red heifer, bas shalish arba shanim, which means in its third or fourth year. Now, let's talk about the color red for a moment. Right, when you imagine a parah aduma, what color do you imagine the cow being?
More of a rust.
More of a rust. More of a rust. Why?
Because a bright red, a cherry red, it doesn't seem natural for an
So in my child's mind, I always imagined parah aduma like the color of a tomato, like a red cow. Now, there are a number of rayas that this is not the case. That doesn't mean actually red. I'm going to, and if you Google it, you'll see now they're raising parah adumas. They aren't red like a tomato. They're more
brown.
But you know what? Even in
So it's
English,
separate from
for example, once upon a time when Emmanuel Zoberman was a few years younger, some people might have referred to him as a redhead. Now, I don't think his hair was red like we use the color red in normal talk, right? We would probably describe that more as ginger or orange or brownish or goldish, right? Different shades. But yet in English it's still stuck, this word redhead. Now, once upon a time, nowadays in the world, we have, how many colors are there, right? Now, of course, there's millions of colors, right? But how many colors are there? 10, 12, yeah, white, black, green, blue.
7.
I don't want to use the word primary colors because primary colors has another connotation
white,
in English,
black,
but there's
and
more than
colors.
7 colors. We have white, black, green, blue, yellow, red, orange, pink, right? We basically, in today's society, we talk about 10 or 12 colors. Now, within blue, you have navy, and you have light blue, and dark blue, and violet, and indigo, but basically, we call all of those shades of blue. In the ancient world, they didn't have 10 or 12 colors. They had 4 or 5 colors. And they considered everything to be, not because the world actually looked different, but colloquially, they didn't use that language. So, for example, if you think of brown and different shades of brown, it's basically a spectrum from moving from red to black. Right? Some shades of browns are closer to red. Very dark browns might be closer to chocolate, to black, So, even if you think of, not to say any racist terms, but we talk about black people, the color of the skin is not black for the most part. It's more brownish, right? So certainly in Torah, by the way, this also has ramifications to the laws of Nida. When you talk about a red color and a brown color, what exactly it means.
Brown's a huge machlokas, right?
But what does brown mean, and who's talking about brown? Are they living 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, where brown meant brown and red meant different things over the ages? That's an important thing.
But I always wondered if made shades of red, or the one there's like reds that are allowed. I always wonder if that's really brown,
Got a few opinions on this.
just a few.
right? When you said there's reds that are allowed.
It's certainly a possibility. Now, so in general, just the fact that the Torah refers to it as red doesn't necessarily mean what we usually mean when we say the word red today. That's number one. Number two, the Gemara says, why is the cow expensive? Why is it so rare to find the kosher parah aduma? Because even a mere 2 black hairs disqualify the cow, right? If a parah aduma had to be red like a tomato, then it would be expensive because it's miraculous for such a cow to exist, right? So that's another proof that it doesn't actually mean red. Now, brown in cows is very common. What's rare is to have a cow that's completely, entirely brown with no speck, goldish brown, with no specks of any other color, not even hairs. Another important source is the Rasak. The Rasak has a tafsir, like a dictionary, a translation of the Torah into Arabic, and the word parah aduma he translates as safra, which those who comment, I don't know Arabic, but those who, the Judeo-Arabic, whatever it's called, but those who comment on this say that it means some sort of goldish color, which again, it's more brown than red. I'll just say one more thing. The word in modern Hebrew, the word for brown is
Chom.
Chom, or in feminine would be choma, right?
Chum.
Chom, brown. That word doesn't exist anywhere in the Torah in the context of brown, with the exception of, we find that word in the context of Yaakov with Lavan's sheep, when he's making all those deals with the colors of the sheep. It says, V'chol chum b'sel Lavan. What does chum over there mean? So, Unclus says shachom, shochin, which Rashi quotes Unclus, and then he says, doim ela adoim, it is similar to red. And then he says, rouge belaz. Now in Old French, in contemporary French, red is rouge, right? So Rashi is saying that brown is red, right? Now, if you look at the same pasuk, other Rishonim, the Ben Ezra, I think, for example, says that it means black. What's going on? They don't have a word in biblical Hebrew for brown, so we have this chum which appears once, and we're like, yeah, it's basically a spectrum between black and red, which we call in contemporary language. We talk about that as being brown. Now, I'll just say something interesting. What color are lentils? Lentil soup. What color is lentil soup?
Depends on the variety.
Depends on the variety. Okay, but I imagine lentil soup being brown. I don't know. That's why I imagine lentil. And we know when Yaakov Avinu gives to his brother Esav the lentil soup, it says that it's red. Why? Because red, not because necessarily the lentils were bright red, but more likely the lentils were brown, and brown is called red in biblical Hebrew. Okay, so basically you take this red cow, you would shecht it on Har HaMishcha, which is Har HaZeisim, facing the Beis HaMikdash. Then there was a whole process that it was burned, and you would burn the paraduma. Now, when you burn the paraduma, including in the what's it called? The pyre? Yes, what it's called? The pyre. No, the pyre. Pyre. Yeah. So there was also the ezev shnitelas, which is the three things. Ezev shnitelas, and what's the third thing? They would throw into the fire a wool. A wool dyed with this type of red from this worm, and an ezev branch. I think there was a third thing. Okay, and they would throw it into the fire, and then the wood. Right? You could throw in as much wood as you wanted. Now this is really important because you want to produce as much ash as possible so that it could last as long as possible. Right? You could throw in as much wood as you wanted into that fire. The only limitation is that it has to be burned during the daytime. So you set out early in the morning to start the whole process. You get the water, you sprinkle in the you start off. You come to our mishka, you shech the paraduma bright and early in the morning. You could put in as much wood as you want as long as you finish your fire before the end of and all of those ashes are kosher for paraduma. So you want to choose a summer day where you have more hours. I mean, it takes a long time. A paraduma to burn a cow till it's complete ash would take a long time, right? And adding wood probably helps.
Do you have to be able to collect the ashes before sundown?
I don't recall exactly that detail.
Wait, the fire has to be out by the night? Or can the fire still be going?
I don't remember. I think it has to be finished because they take out the ashes and they crush it. Sometimes you have clumps of ashes, they have to crush it. The Rambam describes that. Okay, let's move on, right? So now, what do you do once you have these ashes? So then the ashes are separated into three parts. One part was kept as the mishmeres, one part was kept in the chel, which is near the Beis HaMikdash, and the main part was mischalik the mishmeres. That means you didn't have to keep it in Jerusalem. It was spread out to the mishmeres, to all the Jewish people, and whenever they needed to become purified, either themselves or their furniture, they would use the paradum ashes. How did you use it? You would take water. The water had to be taken in a special way from a live spring and not do any work. But basically, you would fill up this cup of water with all the details in halacha. You would put a tiny little bit of ash from the paraduma onto the water, and then you take the ezev and you dip it in the water and you sprinkle on the person. And as soon as a drop of water touches the person or the piece of furniture or utensil, on day 3 since their contamination, and again on day 7 since their contamination, then they go to mikvah and they are tahir. So you can see how it lasts a really long time, because you could add lots of wood into the fire, have lots of ash, and everything, you have a whole cup of water, you only need to put a little bit of ash, and then you could sprinkle that on so many people and so many items. So the paraduma really does go a long way, yes.
If a person, Pastor Shalom, has to accompany another person who was in a car accident and to the hospital, and the person in the accident passes away, and he's given a ride back home, what's the status of the car?
If the car is receptive to tumah?
Yes.
I don't know. I know that there's a lot of discussion in the Pesachim about airplanes, because airplanes fly over cemeteries. There was once what?
And carry bodies too.
Well, some not every. It's more, there's more. Yes, then it's not. Unless you're flying to Israel, it's not. I mean, it does. It happens, but it's not likely that any plane you go on is going to be carrying a Jewish body. But if you fly to JFK, for example, there's a high chance that you're going to be flying over a Jewish cemetery.
No, but he's talking about a case for sure.
Yeah, no, I
You're
understand.
for sure you're tummy in that case.
No, he's talking about
Doesn't matter.
somebody who was in
Does the
because the
car.
oil itself maintains its tumah. The oil itself can be makabel tumah. So what's the status of a car? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. All right. Historically, how do we know which para adumas have happened? So the Mishnah in Masechtas Para Perek Gimel Mishnah Hey lists gives us the whole history of para adumas. Number 1, who made the first para aduma? Moshe Rabbeinu. Number 2, who made the second para aduma? Ezra HaSofer. How many years are between Moshe Rabbeinu and Ezra HaSofer, approximately? Right, Moshe Rabbeinu is in the desert. They come into Israel. They have a few hundred years of the Mishkan going around, and then they have that's I think a total of about 500 years, and then they have the Beis Hamikdash itself stands for over 400 years, and then the 70 years of Golus Babel. So you're talking about 900 years, right? One para aduma lasts for approximately 900 years.
Can you take additional halachic water and add it to what you've already made?
Yeah, every time you use the para aduma, sorry.
Indefinitely, right?
The para aduma, you have your container of ashes. Every time you need to use it, you fill up your cup, you take a little bit of ashes onto the water, and you use it. So if you have 10 gallons of ashes, that could last you thousands of gallons of para aduma water.
Do you have to use only a certain amount of water each time to make it?
I can't say offhand exactly. It's all the
Seems so
details.
simple.
Okay.
You run out. Yeah.
Now, here's the question.
We
Here's the
only
question.
need one.
One second. We're going to see a question. Now, then the Mishnah continues. The second one was made by Ezra. And then, the Chacham say that from Ezra until today, there were additional 7 made, all in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Who are the people who made these? Shimon HaTzadik, V'Yochanan Kohen Gadol, they did 2 each. Eliyahu ben HaKoyf, Chanam HaMitzvah, Yishmael ben Piavi, they each made 1. So you have Moshe doing 1, Ezra doing 1, Shimon HaTzadik 2, Yochanan Kohen Gadol 2, and then these last 3 people 1 each. That brings you to a total of 9. When the Rambam quotes this halacha, he adds, and it's a big Plantonish, nobody I've already asked where does the Rambam get this from, but the Rambam adds on the words, Siris Yasa, the Rambam is in Para Aduma Paragim Halacha Dalad, Siris Yasa Melech HaMashiach Meheru Yigola. The 10th one will be made by the King Mashiach, may he be speedily revealed, and in some versions of the Rambam it adds the words Amen Ken Yehiratzain. And there's a very famous sikha from the Rebbe about this, about why the Rambam adds in the words Mehira Yegoda. This is a book of halachas, it's not a time for prayer. In general, there's a lot of discussion about this Rambam. Where does the Rambam get this from? That the 10th one will be done through Mashiach, and of course this is very relevant to the contemporary discussion of those who want to initiate doing Paraduma now. Are you allowed to do it now, or do we have to wait for Mashiach? Just a few points going back to this thing. The most obvious question that comes to mind when you read this Mishnah is how is it that one paraduma of Moshe Rabbeinu lasted 900 years, and then from Ezra for the duration of the 400 and something years of the second Beis Hamikdash, they needed another 9 of them. Why did they need so many?
Population growth.
So I've seen 2 opposite answers to this question.
Good times.
What?
Not good times.
Not good times. So I've seen I saw some people saying, which surprised me, I saw some people saying that in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash they were much more professional at being careful about Tahara, and they were much more into it, like the Rambam says, it's a value to maintain Tahara all the time. So in the second Beis Hamikdash they were much more into it, and they were much more frum in that way, and so they needed more of it. Okay, that's one possible explanation. I also heard an explanation, the reverse, which resonates with me better, is that in the first Beis Hamikdash, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, they were used to maintaining this standard of living, and so they were able to be more careful from becoming tummy. Whereas after the Golus, when they lived in Bavel for all these years, etc., like us today, imagine now you have to start living a life of Tara. You wouldn't know we would all be like completely ignorant, and every step of the day we would have 100 shilas, right? So perhaps the reason is that during the time until the first Golus of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, they were much more professional at maintaining a level of Tara. And perhaps this is also backed up by the Gemara that says that in the days of, I think it was Chizkiyahu HaMelech, it's in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Dal Damed Beis, that it says that they sent, and he wanted very strongly that everybody should know the laws of Tara, and it says that they sent out sort of the detectives over the entire land, Bodkum Midon Vad Beersheva, and V'leimotzu Amoretz, Migeves Vadan Trifas, the whole span of Eretz Yisrael, V'leimotzu Tinik V'Tinoikus Ish V'Isha. There wasn't even a man or woman or even a boy or girl Shalohu B'Kiyin B'Hilchas Tumah V'Tara who weren't experts in the laws of Tumah and Tara. So I think, to me, that explanation resonates more that in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash they just didn't need it as much as they did later. Okay, now there's a problem when we say that Ezra made the second one, and that is as follows. If you look in the book of Ezra, it's clear that. Okay, so in Ezra chapter 3, it says that they were already bringing karbanis before the Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt. Right? It says they were even bringing voluntary karbanis. And the temple was not yet rebuilt. Now, we know it's basically explicit in the Pesukim in Ezra, and the Gemara talks about this in Megillah Taftazayin Amud Beis, that Ezra himself didn't come up to Eretz Yisrael until after the Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt, in the 7th year of the ones that came up. And the reason was because he was still learning Torah with Baruch ben Neriah, and the Gemara says from here, we see that learning Torah is more important than building the Beis HaMikdash, right? But be that as it may, they were already bringing even voluntary sacrifices before the Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt. Now, some sacrifices, Pesach, etc., override Tumah if everybody's tummy. But voluntary sacrifices don't override Tumah. So how could Ezra have still been in Chutz La'aretz, in Bavel, and they already had a Parah Aduma before the building of the Beis HaMikdash, if they were bringing the Davis before? So what does it mean that Ezra made the second one? Yes?
It doesn't say it ran out. You didn't mention that they ran out. You just said that they made another one.
So you're saying that maybe they still had the first one.
It was being
It
proactive.
takes ashes to make ashes, right?
Yeah. So you're
No, that's tongs.
Well, that too, yeah.
you're saying that maybe they still had the first. There's the Pirush Harash on the Mishnayos brings from a Tosefta that they had the ashes of Moshe Rabbeinu were hanging on the wall, and the Nebuchadnezzar didn't destroy the wall; he just destroyed the structure, but the wall remained, and they still had the ashes there. There is such an idea. Okay, so there's a number of answers to this question. It's possible, Taka, that Ezra made it later, but they still had the original Parah Aduma from before. But there's also another possible answer, a number of answers, but one answer is actually going a step back. What does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu made the first one? I was hoping somebody might ask this question. Who made the first Parah Aduma?
We said Moshe Rabbeinu.
Who made the first Parah Aduma?
Moshe Rabbeinu.
Really? We just read it in the Torah yesterday. What does it say? Who made it?
Oh.
Elazar. Elazar made the first one, right? So what does it mean when we say Moshe Rabbeinu did the first one? You have to be a Kohen. Moshe's not a Kohen, right? What we mean when Moshe said the first one is that it was done under his jurisdiction, under his guidance, right? So perhaps when we say that Ezra did the second one, it could be that it was done before, and Ezra, either he came to visit and went back, or even if he stayed in Bavel, but he oversaw it, he sent them guidance, he was the Gadol Hador. So, okay, fine. Upon him, Moshe Rabbeinu does the first one, then we have another 9 from Ezra. By the way, okay, so the last one, now think about this, the last one is Yishmael ben Piavi, who is approximately, there's some discussion of exactly who Yishmael ben Piavi is. He's a Kohen Gadol. I think that some scholars want to say that is actually Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, who we know from the 10 Harugei Malchus, the 10 martyrs of the Romans. But be that as it may, he was at the very end of the period of the Second Temple, perhaps 10, 11 or so years before the destruction, according to other scholars who place him maybe 20 years earlier than that. But he was at the end of the second Beis HaMikdash. Now, there's actually an interesting story about him. The Mishnah says that he did a Parah Aduma, but actually Tosefta says that he did 2 Parah Adumas, but one of them was thrown out. It was discarded. Gozru Allah v'shavcha v'chazav asa acheres. What was the problem? So this is a fascinating thing to do with para aduma. Para aduma is kosher b'tvula yoim. That means like this: when a person goes to mikveh from most types of tuma, so you go to mikveh, but then they are called a tvul yoim. They toivel that day, and then in order to complete the purification process, you need to have harif shemesh. You need to wait for the sun to set, and the next day, that night, they become completely pure. Now, the Sadducees, they believed that the kohen who does the para aduma, who shechts and burns it and all that, does the whole procedure, he has to be completely tahor. But our Masorah is that it's even okay for him to be at full yom. So because Chazal came, and because so Chazal always looking for ways to get the Sadducees way, to push them away. So they said, we're going to dafka go and make him a full yoim to prove our point. So every time they did a para aduma, they would take the kohen, he would go through the whole purification process, they would sprinkle on him the ashes on the 7 days preceding him doing the para aduma, and then he would go to mikvah. And then before he did the para aduma, they would take a dead lizard or something and touch him, and that way and then he would go to mikvah, and that way he was a full yoim, and the Sadducees would not have any of it, and we would dafka going this way. Now, Yishmael ben Piavi, he made a para aduma, and he didn't do that. He did it with a regular tahor kohen. Chazal said, no, we cannot have a para aduma that was made by a kohen that's not a full yom. If you do this could cast aspersions on previous paras adumas. Absolutely not. And so after all the work and effort that goes into para aduma, they discarded the whole thing and did another one without full yom, just in order to dismiss the attitude
With
of
the tvul yom.
with the tvul yom. Yeah, we'll teach you. All right. Okay. Yes.
You were talking over the millennia, there were 9 that were processed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and now all of a sudden we're told that there's a half a dozen or so that are out there.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything you didn't touch on this? I didn't know. Are there any restrictions if these cows were born and raised by artificial means?
Possible. I don't know for sure.
I mean, because at least in the dairy industry, most cows are artificially inseminated.
No,
And I didn't know if that, or even if gene manipulation was involved.
it's certainly possible. I don't think that would be a problem necessarily.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
Okay, let's move on. All right. So we have the final para aduma to date being made somewhere within the last 15, possibly 20, 30 years of the Beis HaMikdash. How far does that go? Right? How long does it last? Right? The Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. There's no para haduma has been done post the destruction. It's not entirely correct. There has been some sort of, I believe some of the Ethiopian Jews maintained some sort of procedure of para haduma, but obviously it's not halachically worth anything. It was done in Africa and whatever. But the last kosher para haduma was made approximately 2,000 years ago, give or take, right? How long does that para aduma last? So you think, okay, that's it. The Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. Who's doing Tumah and Tahar anymore? And it just falls to the wayside and it's gone. But actually, fascinatingly enough, it seems clear that for hundreds of years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, they still had ashes of the para aduma, and B, there were at least some Jews who were still using it and maintaining a lifestyle of tahara. Now, yes?
I was just going to say, is it in the realm of possibility that somewhere buried out there is...
Absolutely, I hope to get to that.
Kosher...
Yeah, I hope to get there soon, but it's already 10 to 10, so we have to be careful with which things we elaborate on. Okay. I think I'm going to skip some of the rayos from the various stories in Gemara, just in the interest of time. But I'll just skip to one thing which I found fascinating. We've actually come across this before. If you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, after Pesach, we did a class on eating challah, the Kohen eating challah nowadays, right? Remember we had this whole story where Erev Pesach was Shabbos and the guy baked challah before Pesach, right? Remember that? Now, until not so long ago, until perhaps a couple hundred years ago, it was standard practice amongst certainly Ashkenazi Jews, perhaps all Jews, that on Pesach, Kohanim did eat challah outside of Eretz Yisrael. We could talk about why that changed and how it changed, but that was the minhag. Now, what's the din of challah? In Eretz Yisrael, there's a biblical din of separating challah from the dough. In Chutz La'aretz, it's on a rabbinic level. Now, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, everybody agrees that in Chutz La'aretz you have to take two challahs you have to separate challah twice. The first one you burn, because we're all impure and we're not allowed to eat it. But then, if you just do that, people will think that what's the mitzvah of challah? To take a piece of dough and burn it. So therefore, you have to take a second challah, and that second challah can be eaten by the kohanim in Chutz La'aretz. That's the halacha. It's clear in the Mishnah and the Gemara. Nobody disagrees on it. Now, has anybody here ever seen that being done? No, right? Nobody ever seen that being done. Now, the Rosh, how long ago is the Rosh? Let's guess around 900 years ago. He's in his commentary to Chulin, where he talks about challah, he is completely. He says, I don't understand. Tema, it's shocking. Nowadays, in most places, we don't separate the second challah. Right? Now, it's interesting that the Rosh says most places. The Rosh himself actually was a very well-traveled man, because he started out his life in Germany. He was a Talmud of the Maram Rothenburg, and then later on in life he had to run away, and he ended up in Spain by the Sfardim. So he had a lot of exposure to different communities and different customs. And he's saying most places, it seems like the Rosh did see perhaps some places that do it, and I don't know for sure. It's possible that nowadays there are still some Jews who do this, but certainly by and large it's not done. Says the Rosh, you know why we don't do it anymore? Because in the days of the Amiroim, when they were still eating truma in a state of purity in Eretz Yisrael, because they had the ashes of the parah aduma, and he brings the right from the Gemara. So because in some places they ate challah, so that's why you had to take the second challah in Chutz La'aretz, so that people shouldn't think that you burn challah and then they would go to Israel and burn it. But nowadays that in Israel we don't have the parah aduma, and there's no one ever an opportunity to eat challah b'tara, so therefore there's no need anymore to do the second challah in Chutz La'aretz, because wherever you are, even if you're in Eretz Yisrael, you're going to be in a state of impurity and you're going to have to burn the challah. So, without getting too distracted with the laws of Hafrashas challah, what we see from this Rosh is that he's accepting that in the days of the Amiroim, which you're talking at least 300, if not 400 years post Churban, they still had ashes of the parah aduma. Right? One of the stories he brings is from Ula, who, if I recall correctly, died in the 4th century of the Common Era. So you're talking at least 350 years or so, at least 300 years or so after the Churban. But I think this rise to even close to 450 years that they still had the ashes of the parah aduma. So for many, many years they were maintaining this state of tahara. Now, what about later? Now, so Reb Tim mentioned that is it possible that the Heifer para is still around somewhere? And this would help when Mashiach comes, because or those who want to do the para. Here's the deal: like Reb David said, you need ashes to make ashes. In order to do the para aduma, you have to have a kohen who is free of tumas meis. So how do you get a kohen who's free of tumas meis? Either you have a kohen who's born and raised in a tumah free environment, which is a difficult task to accomplish. Maybe doable, but certainly difficult. Or you find the ashes of the paraduma, which may be hiding out somewhere, and then you're good. Then you could just use it. Now, even then, you would need the person sprinkling it to be tahir from tumas meis. But Akabanim would certainly make the procedure easier, because you would just need him to be sprinkled. You wouldn't need the whole process of making a new para aduma. There are sources that suggest that the ashes of the para aduma have been hidden, and that when Mashiach comes, Eliyahu Hanavi will reveal to us the location of the hidden ashes of the para aduma. In addition, there are sources that suggest that over the generations there were tzaddikim who had access to the paraduma. There's a famous Karban Nesanel on this Rosh over here that he says that certain people had the paraduma, and there's a fascinating expression from the Chidah, none other than the Chidah, who is very into biography. He writes about all different people in history, and the Chidah writes in his Sefer Midbar Ketemos, he says, "V'aniba aniyusi pshitali." It is obvious to me, no doubt, that the Rabbeinu Harizal, that the Harizal himself, he was purified with the Heifer of Para Aduma through Eliyahu and Novi Zachar Latayv, and that's how he had Ruach HaKodesh, and he was able to accomplish all the amazing things that the Harizal accomplished. It would be impossible for him to have achieved all of that thing without the Para Aduma. And even though I haven't seen this written anywhere, and I haven't heard this, this is clear to me, because there's no other way he would accomplish that. And indeed we find other sources that suggest that attain, and kind of in line with the Rambam that we read before in Tumas Eichlin, that to attain levels of Ruach HaKodesh and prophecy, etc., and we find in the Gemara stories of the Amiroim who were creating a calf or creating things through Kabbalah, Kabbalah masses, right? That they weren't able to do it without the Eifar Apara. So there is this idea, again, there is this idea that in order to attain certain spiritual goals, which there were tzaddikim over the generations who maintained that possibly they did have access to Para Aduma even hundreds of years after the Amiroim in question. Be that as it may, sorry?
It would be easier than fasting.
Yeah. Be that as it may, nowadays nobody knows where any Heifer Para is. There is. Oh, I just want to say one more thing about the end of the Paraduma. What's pshat? How did it finish? Right? Did it just run out? What happened? So I saw one article which he has his whole theory. I'm not convinced by it, but I do want to share it nonetheless. He wants to suggest that there was one central location besides the ashes that were kept in the vicinity of the Beis HaMikdash. There was one central location where the Para Aduma ashes were kept, and that is in a city called Beis Sha'arim, which is in the north near Tiberia. Now he has his whole way how he builds up that he finds a reference in the Mishnah and different stories. He wants to sort of put together this enough circumstantial evidence to determine that that's the place where the Para Aduma ashes were kept. And then he says, we know from archaeological and historical findings that there was a major rebellion in Beis Sha'arim, and basically approximately in the year 452, he says, of the Common Era, Beis Sha'arim was completely destroyed. And so perhaps it kind of matches up the dates. Perhaps that's why we lost the ashes of the Para Aduma, because Beis Sha'arim was destroyed and the ashes of Para Aduma perhaps were mixed with the ashes of the rest of the city, and whatever it is, it was destroyed. It's a nice theory, and he has a lot of, like I said, circumstantial evidence. The main thing about it that I don't like is that it's not mashma from the Mekoros that there was one place that they kept the ashes of the Para Aduma. It's mashma that they would give it out, and they had a few spots in Israel where it was kept. And he's trying to sort of build this theory that it was all kept in one place. Now, what about doing a Para Aduma nowadays? So, as I mentioned, there is a whole movement affiliated with the Mochen HaMikdash, where they're raising Para Adumas. I may even have a picture here where you could see them. If no, it's not here, but whatever, you Google it, you could find it. I think currently they have 4 or 5 kosher candidate cows being raised in somewhere in the north of Israel. And like I said, there's more in America, and I'm sure the process of transporting them from America to Israel in a way that there should be no thing is whatever. I'm sure it has to be done under close care. Whatever the case is, so they have a movement, and they have here a whole booklet I printed out, a number of pages, where they go through all the challenges. Okay, what shade of red do we need, and is it possible in Bichlal? Are you allowed to do we have to wait for Mashiach, and do we have to have? Can you do a Para Aduma? It says it has to be done opposite the Mishkan, opposite the El Moed. So can you do it without the building of the base? So they have proofs. They want to say that Ezra did it. This was relevant to what we spoke about before. They want to maintain that it was done in the days of Ezra before the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Maybe that's not a raya. Maybe like you said, David. Maybe they used the one from Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, whatever it is, they have the whole thing. Now, I just want to say that I'm not aware of anything from the Rebbe or the Rabbeim explicitly against this. However, if I'm to paraphrase the Chidah when he talks about the Arizal, I think Libby Omerli, that the Rebbe and Hasidus in general would not be pro these efforts, because in general we have this idea that, first of all, like we said, we don't know exactly what the source of the Rambam is, but the Rambam says that Mashiach makes the 10th one, right? So it could just mean, okay, it's going to be in the future. But
It could be a hopeful statement.
It could be a hopeful statement. Meir Yegola. Could be. I'm not dismissing that. It could be understood that way. But I think that it's likely in the Rebbe's sort of very conservative, lowercase c attitude to these type of things. You don't mess with that. But you have the letter of the Rebbe Rashab even about Tcheles, where the Rebbe Rashab says that we don't wear Tcheles before Mashiach comes, even if it has been rediscovered. Exhibit A, no, show us. So, right? So Ari is not. That's one of the things of the Rebbe Rashab that he doesn't do yet. But so certainly such a thing. It's actually brought in Chassidus that there's a number of things related to the number 10 that are associated with Mashiach, the 10th song and the 10th thing, whatever. There's a number of things brought associated with Mashiach and the number 10. So perhaps this is also one of them. There's other there's a tshuva of Rashi where he mentions about Mashiach, I think, doing it. I didn't put it on my sources. There's a Ramban in the Parsha of Paraduma where he says, "Ad yara aleinu ruach mimorim v'yizrik Hashem aleinu mayim tohirim unetar v'chein hiratzim meher v'yameinu." Again, it's not explicit, but it certainly implies his understanding that the Paraduma will not and cannot be done before the guidance. Again, by the way, when we talk about Mashiach himself is not a Kohen. He can't do the Paraduma himself, but he, just like Moshe Rabbeinu, he can be the one overseeing and guiding the process of the Paraduma. And so my hunch is that the Rebbe would not be pro efforts to actually make a Paraduma nowadays, but certainly there's nothing wrong, and probably there's something right with raising Paradumas in anticipation, so that when Mashiach comes we have one ready, and most certainly learning the halachis and the areas of Torah related to Paraduma should be a schus to be able to be mekayim the mitzvah kipshutay karev mamish mehira yegala amen ken yehiratzu.